So I'm a biomedical engineer and originally came to New York for a master's degree here at Columbia. Originally then started doing clinical trials, global multi-center trials, academic, biotech and pharma. Got a master's degree, got a second master's degree, and ultimately decided I didn't want to do a PhD. I'd rather have other MDs and PhDs working with me, for me, other people that would be much more expertise in some of the different areas. My field is imaging, medical imaging. And with the clinical trials, it's not standard of care, things that you go to the doctor for now. It's quantitative imaging, making measurements, measuring the size of your brain volume, your heart, even unique things like how much muscle and fat you have in your entire body. So we would do things like whole body MRI. And this is kind of buried because how many people in general, population, know that a radiologist is actually even a medical doctor? They're not the ones that come out and see you. So it's quite interesting that not only is the imaging and the testing that gets done inside the hospital, inside the radiology department, but for clinical trials, you don't participate unless you participate in a trial. So today, given that background, I'm going to explain a little bit about the work I'm currently doing, even beyond the clinical trials, and ultimately it's the future of imaging, next generation healthcare. So I'll start by saying, actually, who really needs technology more? Is it the experts at Harvard, Stanford, in the operating room, in the clinics, who have the latest, greatest technology, all the AI already? Or what about the remote clinics, the hospitals that have a ratio of 50,000 patients per doctor in Africa, India, and other remote regions? Perhaps that's a better use of some of these technologies because of scale. We do things for one patient, and yes, the value of a life is not calculatable, but perhaps we can do more for many, many, many more people. So going from, let's say, a hospital clinic to a remote clinic, even people who have to travel. Yes, we have medical deserts here in the US even. Hospitals are closing, they're being decentralized, all of the technologies are moving out. You see the urgent care clinics here on the corner. But things like the social divide, digital divide, social determinants of health are becoming a big issue. But here in the US, when we deal with them, we're talking about nutrition and paying for an Uber and housing for people to get to a doctor. I think there are more things that we can do with technology. So how can we leverage this technology? For remote healthcare workers and all of these things, digital apps, trackables, wearables, things that are happening now. Very convenient. Yes, first world problems like the Uber to your doctor's appointment, but they can technically be used for a lot more. We can do a lot more remote data monitoring, real world evidence, real-time data even. And much like leapfrogging technology, like now, we can use the mobile phone and tablet. Older and younger generations are skipping PCs, desktop computers, and laptops, even the same way that mobile banking has leapfrogged physical banking infrastructure in some developing countries. I think the time is right where these technology devices and techniques can make a big difference in, like at the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago, healthcare for all, remote, real world. So one of the specifics that I look at is being able to take a lot of the imaging and apply it around the world. So just from a consumer, almost a consumer perspective, but the consumer experience that we have of software as a service, being able to use any device anywhere, we've worked on utilizing any MRI scanner anywhere in the world and doing the same type of quantitative imaging, standardized, standard operating procedures, because right now the way healthcare works is a radiologist uses his experience and expertise, and I would never knock that. But that's one person. Perhaps he even changes over time from now to diagnosing something in a month, in a year. Let alone, let's say you live here, you live in California, you live somewhere else in the world. How different is that same diagnosis going to be? So when we standardize these things, we make it much more accessible and much more reliable. But the problem is, even though there are something like 36,000 MRI scanners in the world, 90% of the world's population doesn't have access to that. Yes, we can do, again, all of the devices. We can do handheld ultrasound, you can plug it into your phone, you can do portable x-rays, but that's quite limited. That's quite limited. It might be good to use cheaper, faster, more efficient devices, but I question, could we flip that? Flip the script where it doesn't have to be the remote healthcare worker in the desert, the mountain, and the jungle, just using handheld ultrasound to look at one specific tiny little anatomy with not as much resolution. If we're educating them, and I was speaking to a couple representatives from the World Health Organization at another conference a couple weeks ago, and hearing them say, yes, we have these big initiatives on trying to educate and trying to push more out, but why don't we use technology for technology's strengths? Not applying technology, let's say, to medicine, or thinking that medicine or health and medicine is just a data problem, because it's not. There's culture, and that's a really big barrier to making changes. A lot of the existing systems, a lot of the existing stakeholders don't want to change. But rather than using technology, let's say AI, to eat the radiologist, why don't we use it to help them, to leverage their experience and expertise, and take care of the workflow problems, the things that are mundane and routine. And in my opinion, the example is when you see the big tech companies making the headlines of AI beating a dermatologist, a radiologist, I question, well, then how come they're not dominating the medical imaging market the same way they are search? Well, I guess that's because they're not being able to get implemented. So with the WHO perspective, they have looked at a lot of things about defining accessibility to healthcare. And yes, we can, again, get a lot of these technology components out there, but the work that I do is essentially the software as a service, pay-per-use, the ability to use the existing infrastructure of MRI scanners. We're using it as a dumb device, very technically advanced, but we use it just for data acquisition, just like many other technologies, where we will acquire something, take it off, and then process it. That does need a lot of education, not technical education, but culture change, and educating the people on what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve. So trying to be as collaborative as possible is one of the new mantras in digital health and I guess the new economy, right? Not to be proprietary, not to be, as some of the technology companies, acquiring everybody's data and then privately making new products, making money off of it, and not really sharing the data. I think the trends of patient centricity, ownership of data, price transparency, and privacy are all things that should be embraced and enabled to move forward. So I'll continue where right now, for current healthcare, especially in the US, we do it piece by piece. If you have a heart problem, you go see the cardiologist. If you have a liver problem, you go see the liver doctor, and that's about it. Your referring physician, your general practitioner, might receive the information in the, ideally, medical record, electronic medical chart, and then he or she makes the interpretation from the combination of those. But I look to a future where we're actually scanning everything at one time. We have a lot of the technical capabilities in place, and why can't we do it now? Again, some of it's culture, some of it's normal practice. Doing things like a 5-minute MRI scan of the brain instead of 30 and 45 minutes, not having to sit in the scanner that long, in order to measure the brain volume of the hippocampus and predict, actually track and measure whether you're developing into dementia and Alzheimer's. Much different than just taking the genetic test and saying you might develop Alzheimer's at some point. It's like driving across country, right? And you have the road map and you're saying, I'm going to take Route 66. Well, there's a detour, you want to stop and see the Grand Canyon, so many other things might happen. And I think that's where using imaging in this type of way to actually measure, monitor, essentially a digital physical exam, where we can take a look inside the body, because all of these devices, they're superficial, measuring the skin, the sweat, the other information, and some things like the portable imaging devices can look inside, but they're not as comprehensive, they're not as quantitative. So to put something together like this has been my challenge over the last 2 years, and I'm glad to say that we're actually making quite a bit of progress. In the US, it's a little bit of early adoption, you know, the quantified self, the executive physical type of work, but I'm very pleased to say that outside of the US, especially Asia first, but starting to move back towards India, Middle East, and hopefully Africa soon. There's public health systems, there's a lot more population health work to be done, there's a lot of already medical tourism and screening capacities where they want to just get everything done. Now, they don't necessarily use it for continuity of care to see, are you continuing to develop a disease? Let's say we all are quite young, healthy looking, and thin, but we all could have fatty liver disease depending on diet or other predispositions, exercise, things like that. So would you rather have a needle stick to the gut and all of the risks of that versus a 5-minute MRI to be able to measure some of the same amount of fat, iron, inflammation, and fibrosis? So to be able to take scans like that faster brings the cost down, brings the time down, and in a remote region, in a developing nation where scan time, just like the 50,000 patients per one doctor, the scanners are generally older, they're generally much more scheduled, 3 months out for an appointment, and to utilize the technology to make things faster is one of our biggest areas of focus. But to continue to push out into more of the remote regions, we're looking at portable MRI technology. Certainly developed several different developments across the globe, whether it's India or Asia. One as well developed here at Columbia. And these are enablers. Again, this is a technology enablement where instead of the scanner just scanning one part of your body, let's say you tear your ACL playing tennis, skiing, running, hiking, whatever it is. Right now, again, that example, you go in and scan that 1-inch little ligament, and that's it. You miss the opportunity to establish a baseline, to measure your brain, your heart, your liver at the same time, in case you develop a condition related to that in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So with some of the new technology that's coming out in the future for MRI, actually not too far off, maybe 2 years, is a portable MRI scanner. That's estimated about $300,000 US for the prototype instead of 1.5 million and 3 million. Something that it runs on liquid nitrogen and doesn't need liquid helium, which is in a global shortage. And in the scanning capacity of the single organs versus the whole body that I mentioned, it's something that would scan the entire body, and if the doctor only needed or wanted something, we would just recreate that one organ and tissue for that. So these are things where now we can start to change from sick care, I won't even say healthcare, from sick care, because by the time you develop symptoms and go to a doctor, you've already got something, just as if it was as simple as a cold. But to be able to look inside the body without any radiation, without even an injection for a contrast agent, and be able to tell directly, do you have fat in your liver? Do you have a structural abnormality? that can be very powerful. That can be something where we can start to intercept disease. Can we help change the course of developing dementia? Can we help decrease the rapid decline of cardiovascular disease, of liver disease? Can we actually start to utilize these technologies across the entire lifespan? Because it's non-invasive, we can do things like measuring the fetus in utero and comparing their body composition or their high metabolic rate organs to others and monitor that across the lifespan, 3 months old, 6 months old, as well as into adulthood or aging. Everybody's got an aging problem coming up in terms of global population health. So these are areas where I think we can really start to make a difference. And I would impart to everyone that what I've found, and my travel schedule has been over the last year, commuting between New York, Middle East, and Asia just about every month. And the reason I've made the most progress is because of networking, community outreach, and just taking the chance to try to meet somebody, to say hello. And I think that's what I've appreciated with being invited to speak here and the opportunity to meet more new people. So I hope that can give you a glimpse of what's to come and some of the things that I've done to make the future happen. Thank you.